Hello, and welcome to Synthesized Sunsets. Today, we are joined by Regina Kanyu Wang, an award-winning author and translator of Chinese speculative fiction. In 2022, she co-edited a pioneering collection called The Way Spring Arrives, a collection of short fiction and essays from female and non-binary authors. She currently works at the Co-Futures Project at the University of Oslo, a forward-looking international research group dedicated to technology and the arts. She's also heavily involved with Apple Core, a Chinese sci-fi club that has been running for over a decade in Shanghai. Regina, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. And I think you already talked a lot about me, so I don't need to do a self-introduction.
Sci-fi, it's still pretty niche in China from my understanding, but even like 20 years ago or so, it was really quite new. So how was it sort of getting into sci-fi and becoming part of the community as it developed?
I think there is actually a long history of science fiction in China, but you're right that it was still quite niche 20 years ago. I started joining the community through the University Science Fiction Club. So as you mentioned, I was co-founder of SF Apple Core. At that time, I was a fan and I joined those hobby groups in university, and one of them was the science fiction and science fiction club. So when I joined that club, I found many people who share similar interests with me, and it was just fun to hang out with them. So we made connection with other university science fiction clubs, and together we want to do something. So that's why we founded as Apple Core. It started as an alliance between Shanghai University science fiction clubs, and we run Shanghai Science Fiction and Fantasy Festival every year, during which we kind of have joint events on different campuses all over Shanghai. And when we grew up and we graduated from university, we started to have events outside of campus as well, try to attract more adult fans because we also become adults. And we have reading clubs, movie screening, and panel discussion, or we invite authors to talk, even have a Christmas party. So the idea is to just gather people who are interested in the similar genre and to have a happy time together. So I think my entry into the science fiction field is actually through the fandom community, because I was a reader of science fiction, but I also read other genres. I was also a reader of comic, but through the fandom community, I became more and more attached to science fiction along my way.
In terms of let's say an average day at this club, is it normally just discussing stuff you've read? Do you do writing as well, or is it inviting an author or something to talk, or?
It's everything actually. Just like many university fan clubs,
Yeah.
or you discuss everything. But usually we tend to like to discuss about, for example, themes in science fiction, and also we invite authors that we like to join us. And in other occasions, we just hang out and eat good food, or just do random things that doesn't mean anything. But the time spent together means a lot.
So, in my mind, as an outsider, I kind of envision the Chinese science fiction community as roughly being composed of two clusters. The first being a cluster that's sort of similar to fans of science fiction in the West, but another cluster that is more centered around the magazine science fiction world, and in particular the author Cixin Liu and his brand of hard science fiction. Now, I know that Science Fiction World is just a really popular magazine and publishes all kinds of different speculative fiction, but my idea of it was sort of that because Cixin Liu is so popular, he was kind of able to create his own scene, and that is responsible for a big chunk of science fiction fans today. Whereas in the United States, you don't really have that same event happening, and so there isn't that same kind of dynamic. Would you say that this is broadly accurate, or would you say that this is not really true?
Yeah, I was thinking like when you say like one cluster is similar to the US science fiction fans, what do you mean? But like it is true that in China, a lot of people get to know science fiction through Cixin Liu's The Three Body Problem, and even like non-science fiction fans. And when they talk about science fiction, or they say, okay, I love science fiction, I have interest in science fiction, the only science fiction book that they have read is Cixin Liu's The Three Body Problem. So that's probably like this big group of the three body problem fan as against the other science fiction fans. So the group of the three body problem fan, they are not necessarily like readers of science fiction world, because in my impression, like the large like group of science fiction fans, actually they read science fiction world, they grew up with science fiction world, because for a long time that was the only science fiction magazine in China, for like I think like over 20 years, about 20 years or something. Like that was the only science fiction book, a magazine in China that publishes this genre. So like that is like this original niche group of fan in fandom in China, which is actually not that small because of the population of China. And then when the Three Body Problem was published, of course, like the original science fiction world fan, they loved this book. It was huge, and they recommended to others. And when the book like became a phenomenon and reached outside the science fiction community, that actually attract interest from many people who have never read or heard of science fiction before, and they became the three body problem fan. And well, because and there was also like uh, there was a process. So when this Rebody Problem won the Hugo Award, for example, it kind of became even more famous and attracted more people. And also, like when the Wandering Earth, the film that was adapted from Cixin Liu's novella, was on screen, so even more people like began to know science fiction. So that is kind of step by step, the people who are familiar with Cixin Liu's work grew larger and larger, but they don't necessarily read other science fiction stories or books. So that can be like some fan of Cixin Liu instead of like fans of like the whole science fiction genre.
Yeah, sorry. Let me clarify a bit about what I mean. So like in the United States, there are very few people that read science fiction magazines. Even amongst fans of science fiction, I would say that like of people who say they like science fiction, probably like less than 10% of them read any kind of science fiction magazines at all. And I would say that like also the scene that exists around them, they're not as into like hard science fiction. I would say like your average science fiction fan is probably more likely to be into hard science fiction than like that core group of people who's still reading the magazines. Whereas like the people who are into like, you know, the more golden age magazines, there was a little bit of a more like active scene in the past. That group still exists, but it's definitely kind of like died out a bit. Whereas I feel like in China, this sort of scene is still kind of like alive and vital as a result of, you know, Cixin Liu having his that style and becoming very popular. So that was kind of the difference that I'm getting at. I feel like it's more rare to find like really hardcore science fiction fans in the U.S. who also are like really into like hard science fiction, especially amongst like younger people.
Mm. Yeah, that's right. I think like the most popular like genre subgenre of science fiction is still hard science fiction in China, and this kind of aesthetic is still like treated as the core of science fiction genre systems in China. And I think like for people who prefer to read like not so hard science fiction, the number is also growing because like science fiction itself has become not just as children's literature in China. So like people think, oh, this is also something like adults can read. So because 20 years ago, it was like more considered as children's literature or just for like popular science function. But these days, the readership has grown, and also the writers have changed because there are also a younger generation of writer, and also more and more foreign language science fiction books have been translated, not only Asimov and Clarke, but also like Jameson and newer generation of writers. So that has also changed the thing. Oh, but still, hard science fiction is quite popular, like this golden age style.
When I think of science fiction in the United States, I tend to think of it as like an older person's genre. Like I think that if you tend to go to like fan conventions and stuff, people tend to be a lot older. And I think when I meet like an older person who's really into books, I'm more expecting them to be a fan of science fiction than I were to meet like, someone my age. But when I was reading about science fiction in China, one thing that I thought was interesting was that Science Fiction World publishes an issue that's related to the university entrance exams. And the club that you work with is, loosely affiliated with like the university, right? So I wanted to ask, like, how closely tied is science fiction in China to like the educational system?
That's interesting because like for the like previous part that you were talking about is like totally true that the age of fans in China, they tend to be younger because Science Fiction World as a magazine, they originally tend to attract readers who are in their teenager age or in their college. So there was a buzz theory of Chinese science fiction fans. So which they say when they like join like a high school or university, maybe university mostly because in high school we have to study and we have to like pass the national higher education entrance exam. But like when they join the university or college, they get on the bus of science fiction and become fans. And after university, they get off the bus because they graduate. They need to move to the adult world. They get to work and marriage and other like adult things. So there used to be a bus theory in Chinese science fiction fandom. But nowadays, things have changed, as I mentioned. Like science fiction has become more adult hobby as well. And for the education system, actually, science fiction was just entering the official education in China in recent years, because previously, as I mentioned, it was like considered children's literature and the things not serious and not classic, so it shouldn't be like studied in school. One key event that was in 1998 or something, I think, because during the national higher education exam, there was an essay like you need to write, and that essay title was the same as a story published in Science Fiction World. Around 2000 or 1998, I can't remember, but around like those years. So that has kind of made people aware that, okay, there was a value of reading science fiction for children. So it's not just something that should be like kept out of school. So that was a key event. So like more people started to like buy science fiction books as a way to prepare for the exam. But then there was also a long silence between science fiction stories became like texts in our textbook. I think that's after like the three-body problem has become a phenomenon and more people get to learn that, okay, science fiction is such a thing, and also it's different from the other kind of literature because of its attachment to science and to future and innovation. So still those very golden age value of science fiction. So that has made some science fiction stories enter the textbook in Chinese education system. And also I found that more and more exam papers, they are also using some science fiction stories as texts. So I also found one of my own stories appearing in those exam papers. So like students need to read the story and kind of analyze, okay, what does this mean? And I can't even make the right answers.
I think that the fact that it's more popular among students kind of goes to explain a little bit about why Chinese science fiction might just be like destined to be harder. Because if you're looking at in an American context, you're pretty much just pulling from the pool of people who are like into books. A lot of people in America, especially guys, just like don't read any books. And so when it's pulling from the pool of high school students, well, then you're probably going to have a lot more people who are just into like these sciencey things. I feel like one other reason why the harder style resonates in China is because like technology is so much newer. There are some places in China that just experience like these massive leaps and bounds in available technology that has been available in the US for like a long time. And so if you look at like when hard science fiction was the most popular in America, it was when we were going through that same stage of technological development. But now we're kind of like on the other side of things, we also had like industrialized food, social media, dark patterns, and now people are kind of like technology. But in the minds of a lot of Chinese people, I'm sure it's still just like this clearly overt positive. So I think people are just kind of more bought into this like positive spirit of science in general. I was wondering like how much you think that impacts people's engagement with science fiction. Does that tend to affect the sorts of things that people write about?
Yeah, you're right. Like the overall attitude towards science fiction and towards science and technology in China is still quite positive, and also like as like China has like recently made many achievements in science and technology, and it has become like on the national discourse to support science and innovation. So science fiction actually find a way into like the mainstream discourse through this way, instead of like social critique or political discussion. But it's like enters the national discourse through science and innovation and technology and such thing. So that has actually made it backed up by the government in a way. So, like in 2023, the World Cup was held in Chengdu. It was the first time in China. And that was also like quite a difference between the World Cups that in the US, because like World Cup has a very grassroots history. So it was started by fans and run by fans and attended by fans. But when you look at the what come in Chengdu in China, it was actually like the government was supporting the bid, and also like there were many government influence like attached to the World Cup. So it's quite different because like the government level thinks, okay, this is science and technology, and it kind of matches with our aim. They would add more value to so-called science fiction industry. For example, Chengdu has released a municipal level 5-year plan to develop its science fiction industry. And also Beijing has some similar like policies. So it's like those municipal level is also like investing into science fiction industry development. For example, reading, movies, and games, and etc. So when you get money for those things, it kind of can get larger and larger. So you can see there is like kind of triangle around those things. The one end is like the fans, the consumers, readers, and one end is the investment and business, and one end is the government. So there is like a kind of positive circle around it, or because of science fiction has its attachment to the science and technology. Another reason is that it has proved to be a successful case. For example, the three-body problem is and the Wandering Earth. They are proved to be successful cultural products that can make money. So I'd say like one reason is this science and technology attachment, and the other reason is that successful like business cases. So that has together made science fiction grow larger outside of just like this niche fandom and become a big thing. And like I think I'm kind of off the topic, but like definitely like this attachment towards science and technology made it like okay, made its aesthetic more like attached to the hard science fiction aesthetic.
You mentioned the three body problem as a sort of cultural export. One thing that I think is kind of interesting about China is that considering its size and economic power, I see three body problem as pretty much one of the only successful cultural exports that's actually fully crossed over into the US and been a success. But my impression was that China is not as concerned with exporting its culture as, say, like Japan or Korea, who's really trying to export it. And like, it's not that Chinese music, for example, is like just not good, but it's like they're just not trying to market it in the same way. So I guess I was curious, why is like China trying to promote domestic science fiction to the rest of the world, but at the same time like not seeming to be making as much of an effort to promote like other areas of culture? Or are they and they're just not being successful?
Yeah, you made a point. The truth is that, like, even science fiction, it's not like because the Chinese government wants to promote it. It's kind of like a grassroots thing. So what China wants to promote outside of the world are those like boring stuff, those mainstream literature or like poetries, which very few people read actually. So they have invested huge amounts of money trying to promote those boring noonday literature outside of China, but apparently like nobody wants to read them. And for like science fiction, it's like a grassroots promotion instead of like the government promotion. So like the three body became so popular was actually incident. Nobody can like expect it. And also like for other Chinese science fiction translation projects, for example, Clark's World Chinese science fiction translation column or The Way Spring Arrives, like we don't get any money from the government like Korean pop music or Japanese animation. It's all like the grassroots level, like some companies or authors or fans that are doing this. So that is a kind of weird thing. I think like maybe the people who at higher level in China make decisions which to be promoted outside of China as Chinese culture. They tend to choose, for example, history or classic and heritage things instead of science fiction or future or like pop things. So it's still like very faced towards the past instead of towards present and the future. So they don't choose what is like most popular now, but they prefer things that can show, okay, this is Chinese culture and the Chinese heritage. That makes it not so successful, I guess. But you can see, like, for example, I don't know whether you see like Li Ziqi's YouTube videos. Though there is a girl who like makes things by hands, like all those different things. So she has many followers on YouTube, but it's also because she is like a YouTuber herself, and she started to make her video by herself, and which shows how can make things in the traditional like Chinese way, and that became popular and larger. Instead of someone at higher level think, oh, we should like promote her. So it's all like get out of China through the more grassroots level instead of okay, Korean government or Japanese government, they support animation or pop culture at a larger level, because I know Korean science fiction get quite much funding from their governments, which I'm jealous of, actually, because we don't.
When I talk to people about Chinese science fiction in America, what everyone wants to know is what about like the censorship? Can you just not say certain things because of like the government? And I kind of have the impression that like people in the West have a pretty distorted idea of how like censorship and free speech works in China. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. It's actually a very interesting thing. So at first, I think like censorship exists everywhere, even in the English market, because when I try to work with some translations in the English market, I also feel like there is a certain kind of censorship that there are things that you can't talk about, like topics you need to be careful with. So that's kind of similar feeling to me because in the Chinese population market, so there isn't any like golden lines about like which you can't talk about or which you should like be careful with, but it's all like the authors and the publishers in their mind, they kind of have some idea of self-censorship, so they are not looking at a white book or something like that saying, oh, this is something you can't talk about. But we kind of have in our mind, there are things that we should be careful with. For example, you can find ways to like go around or not emphasizing it, but you can still like publish about the topics that you want to talk about. For example, LGBTQ related themes, it's like not something that as openly discussed as the US, or it's not something that would be like supported by the official level, but you can still talk about it and get it published. So it's not something that will be abandoned. You just need to kind of like find a way to do it. And my experience when I say like it's similar feeling for me when doing some publications in the English market, it's because I have encountered some occasions that are similar. For example, it's not on my own story, but when I was working to like get other stories, other authors' stories published. For example, when there are topics related, for example, disability, we also need to be careful about the wording and find a way to not trigger controversy discussions. So the difference is probably different in a way that in China, you need to be careful because you want to get published and because there is you still need to get certain proof from the government level. They won't give you a guideline, but they need to approve the contents you published. But in the English market, you can get things published, but you might cause controversy discussion. In order to avoid that, you need to be careful. So that's like two different kind of I don't know whether you can
Yeah,
call it
yeah.
censorship. Yeah, but
Censorship by
it's
the
like
audience.
yeah,
Yeah.
censorship
No,
by the audience.
this is definitely a topic of discussion in the US, like the chilling effects of the audience. Let's talk about your collection. We both recently read this collection, and we are excited to talk about it. The first thing we want to ask you about is when you're editing a collection from like another culture, there's kind of like two different things you have to balance. On the one hand, you want it to in some way like exemplify this like ideological and cultural diversity, right? Like you want to be in some ways foreign, but then you also kind of just want it to be like good speculative fiction, like on its own terms. And so, how did you try to strike that balance? And was there like a specific type of diversity that's like China specific that you were trying to introduce to Western audiences? Or were you more just focusing on like, these are good speculative fiction stories by female non binary creators, and we are going to present them to you?
Yeah, thank you so much for reading it. So, like, we actually like when editing this anthology, it's not only me but also Chen and also like two editors from Tor.com, Lindsay Hoare and Roxy Chen. So, like, the four of us actually like kept communication on the story selection. The rule that we all agree on is that we want to have good stories from Chinese female and non-binary authors. And also we want to have as many stories from different people as possible. So you probably notice that we select those short stories, like shorter stories and even flash fiction instead of like longer pieces, because we want to put more into this book. And most of those stories that we select were not written for the anthology, which means they were already published in Chinese, and some published many years ago. And we know the reader exception in China already. We know that they are like good stories, and some are popular, some not popular, but we kind of like them ourselves. So that's why we select them. And also, like the way we work is Yuchen and I kind of find stories in China, and we like have this story recommendation and the synopsis for Lindsay and Ruoxi, and they don't read like the full Chinese text, but they read the synopsis and recommendation and make a decision on which stories they want to include in the connection. It works in a dynamic way through many rounds, and I don't remember, we probably have like 5 or 6 rounds of story recommendation and to decide the final pieces in this book. In that way, we make sure that those stories are both good stories by themselves and also stories could be relatable for the English authors through the editors from the Tor side. So there are like 2 groups of editors to make sure, okay, those are Chinese stories that are good enough. And also those are topics that could be relatable for the English readers. So like together we make this selection.
I think both of our favorite stories was Dragonslayers. So Dragonslayers is basically an inside look into the secretive craft of Dragonslaying, which is this procedure that is applied on creatures called Jiaoren. So Jiaoren are like these half people, half sea serpent creatures that live in the ocean, and they're really prized for their beauty and also the like the material value of their eyes, which are like these precious gems that can be sold on like the black market. And Jiaoren are basically captured, and then there's this procedure by which they are like cut in half, basically, and then they have human legs that are made to grow out of their form. And this procedure is like very risky and often doesn't work that well, but if it's done successfully, then they can basically sell these Jiaoren as like valuable concubines for this massive profit. And so there's like these secrets of dragon slaying that have been passed down by this group of craftsmen, you could say.
Yeah, something I thought was really cool about this story is so the main character, she's like a doctor. So like at the start of the story, it's just like said like dragon slaying, right? And I'm imagining like people who are fighting dragons and stuff. But then it's like described that the main character, she's like looking forward to, seeing the dragon slaying because they're like known to be like some of the best surgeons and stuff. And it's just like, well, the surgeon, like maybe it's just like, I don't know, some really precise craft in some way or whatnot. But yeah, I mean, it turns out like the dragon slaying is just like literally a surgery. There's kind of like these continuously like more horrifying reveals as the story goes on.
That was also one of my favorite stories. So I was like a fantasy reader in my middle school and high school ages. I read more fantasy than science fiction. And after college, actually, I turned to reading more science fiction because science fiction has become a like larger in China, but deep in my heart, I still love fantasy. So when we got the chance to translate not only science fiction from China, but also fantasy and other like speculative genre, I finally got the chance to reach out my favorite fantasy authors from my like teenager years and asking, oh, can I translate some of your stories into English? Because like not so many of them were translated comparing to science fiction stories. So so I reached out to Shen Yingying, the author, and she sent me some stories. And after reading them and discussing with Yuchen, both of us think the Dragonslayer is a very powerful piece. So we recommended it to Lindsay and Ruoxi, and together we decided to translate it. And we are also lucky to have Emily Xuanijing to translate this story, because she is completely bilingual and familiar with both Chinese culture and English language. So like when she did the translation, in order to make the readers know more about the background of the story, because the story was set in a larger fantastic world. So it's not its own piece, but like there are many books and stories based in that world. So like the author, translator, and editors, Lindsay and Ruoxi, actually had many discussions on how to add more information about the fantastic world that the story is based in to be added into the English version, in order to help the readers learn more about it, because they may not be so familiar with those world building as against the original Chinese readers. So we actually add more pieces of information. For example, those non-fictional paragraphs in those stories, they were specifically added for the English version. So we're very happy to make that selection. And another thing is the translation of Jiaoren, because when we think about this species, it's similar to mermaid, but quite different from mermaid. So the translator, Emily, has also made efforts to try to convey this idea of Jiaoren into English, instead of just using mermaid, which is have very different cultural annotations in itself. So yeah, thanks for liking this story. I'm happy to hear that.
I want to ask a little bit about the last essay, which was talking a little bit about Chinese web fiction. So web fiction is something that Jordan and myself are pretty interested in, because web fiction in America has really not broken into the popular consciousness in the same way. It's really, really just not that popular, especially the sorts of web fiction that are popular in Asia. There are certain types of stock examples of webtoons and serialized fantasy that are much more popular in Asia than they are in the United States. Why do you think Chinese web fiction has taken off so much more than its counterparts in the West? Do you think it's just because people in China read more? Do you think it's because young people in particular read more? Or why do you think that is?
I think they have developed a business model that is very successful. So those web fiction, they kind of has this new business model. The authors serialize their stories on the websites every day, and it goes on and very long. So it's offer a way for people to spend their spare time on the metro or on their way, which you don't need to use so much mind, because usually those web novels, they are very fast and easy to read. So you don't need to spend that much mind or time, but you can find something to do. And they are good stories. And also that's kind of connects to your previous question. It's another thing that's get popular. It kind of gets to the world because it get popular in China, not because it was supported to go to the world, because it's so successful in China. I remember that when web fiction gets very popular in China, there was a very hilarious news about there was an American guy who reads Chinese web fiction in order to fight against his addiction to the drug. So which means those web fiction is more addictable than the drug. So you can see how attractive it is. So that was very hilarious news title that I have read to show, okay, this is popular, and also this is successful cultural export. Usually a plot kind of ends every day at somewhere you want to read, and then tomorrow you need to follow up, and then there's another hook. I think there might be a some connection to the Chinese traditional way of like those 章回体小说, like chapter style novels. So the Chinese traditional classic novels, they are also written in a way of like, okay, one chapter and another chapter. But those novels, they were like kind of so in the old time, there was a narrator who tells the story every day. So today I will tell you this chapter. So this character has done this. And then if you want to know the next thing, you should come tomorrow. So I think there might be a connection to those traditional style of storytelling in ancient China. You kind of, the web fiction kind of creates a digital world for the author to do this storytelling day by day and attract millions of readers to follow up the story. And it's also like when the so that those stories were written day by day instead of okay, I have completed the whole story, I just publish it every day. So those authors, they were also written like thousands of words every day, which is a very hard physical labor. So they were working very hard to create those contents every day for their readers to follow up. And I think that's not some normal people can do, because you need to be very engaging and have very good like physical body, because otherwise you can't endure that intense writing. It's some physical labor as well.
I remember in college at some point reading some Chinese web fiction a bit, and it was really addictive. There were a few times where I was like, wow, I just read 400 chapters of this book. It was not translated well. I don't even like it, the plot or any of the characters. I don't know what I'm doing with my time, but yeah, I don't know. If it works, it works.
Yeah, and also another thing I want to add is that the interaction between the author and the readers. So the readers, usually when the authors were like still realizing those stories online, the readers are able to comment. So like the author actually reads the reader's comments, and that might change the like future plot of this story. So there is an interaction between actually.
The second story in the collection, The Tale of Wude's Heavenly Tribulation, I recognize this as a popular style of Chinese fiction called like cultivation fantasy. But I've actually never read cultivation fantasy or like know much about it. I just know that this is like a type of genre that's like not really so much of a thing in English. And I also know that there's a style of fiction called xianjia, I think, that's like also quite popular in China. Could you talk a little bit like what those genres are and like what you might compare them to?
Yeah, so I think like the cultivation fantasy, they are like very attached to the Taoist tradition. So like they borrow a lot of ideas and traditions from the Taoist cultivation actually. And for xianxia as well, they add like those Chinese style fantastic elements, for example, Taoist and in the like it's like I think like in Chinese culture, we have this tradition of different creators. Not only human beings have wisdom and have like how to say that, spirit. So it is possible for non-human beings to turn into human beings or even turn into Xian, for example. It's not like gods or fairies, but Xian is kind of like god or fairy like more like level of existence. So through cultivation, it is possible to change your status of life. You might be an animal, you might be a human being, you might be a like other kind of like lower level existence, but through cultivation you can climb up the ladder. You need to encounter a lot of difficulties and do a lot of labors, and you need to be challenged, but in the end it is possible for you to get to the higher level of existence, being a more like divine being. So that is quite interesting idea in the Chinese culture, and also like the base for those cultivation fantasy, and also for xianxia stories, because like cultivation fantasy usually it's like, okay, you cultivate yourself and you level up, and for those xianxia stories usually it's include more like romance and also more like xia, because it's xianxia is like, if you compare to wuxia, those kung fu stories, usually there is someone who's fighting for justice and helping the weakness and things like that. So xianxia adds fantastic elements towards it. Like you have romance and you have enemies, but you have a justice in your heart that you need to protect. So those things are like connected with the Chinese cultural tradition.
I did want to call attention to the fact that, I mean, I don't know where you are right now, but you've spent a lot of time in like the Baltic states and like the Nordic countries. And so I was wondering, like, what is that like? And would you say that like this region of the world has like its own quirks for science fiction, or is it pretty much just like dominated by the trends that are just in the West in general? And have you been able to find like your own science fiction community there?
Yeah, so I entered the Nordic and Baltic fandoms through Finland, actually. So I attended FinCon in 2013, and it was like actually a quite large convention. It's sometimes even larger than WorldCon, actually. And what I noticed about the Finnish fandom community is that it's very welcoming to all different media and all different genres. So they don't make divisions between science fiction, fantasy, horror, and other things. Probably you have heard the word Finnish weird. It's their own invention because it's a genre blurring type with Finnish style. So Finnish weird is what their own thing, and it's quite popular in Finland as well. And also like I know in America some conventions are like media conventions, for example, Comic Con, and some conventions are more like literature conventions. They are more like toward targeting at book readers. But FinCon was actually like overall, so through different medias and even like gamers and lappers, but like because it's huge, like comic and role play gets their own convention because like they all started from FinCon, but like they grow larger and get their own thing. And they also have a continuous fan coming into the convention. So it's not like, okay, in the US convention, you will see a lot of elderly generation, and in China, you will see a lot of like younger generation. But in Finland, you can see like from younger people towards the older generation. So when the first time when I attended FinCon, I was shocked by how they could turn speculative fiction all into this convention and the community and made everyone can enjoy themselves. So I became like a fan of Finnish fandom, and then I kept going back again and again. So like they also have this very lovely tradition of adopting foreign fans. So I see a certificate in one fan couple's home saying that, okay, you are officially adopted by the Finnish fandom and you have a fairy godfather and fairy godmother. So like when I first saw that, I think, oh, I want this as well. So after 4 years of efforts, I was adopted by the Finnish fandom as well in 2017. So I have my own adoption certificate. And actually, like my Finnish fandom family, they attended my PhD defense last year. So they came for my defense. They were like my real father and mother. So it's very cute, and it's like a
So cute.
it's just like a family because when I first traveled to Finland and the Nordic and Baltic fandom, I was just a student, so I didn't have money. I asked the local fans, oh, can I stay in your home for a couple of nights and get to know your local fandom? They don't know me, but they all say, yes, you're welcome. So when I arrived in their country, they came to the airport or train station to pick up me, and they give me the keys and say, just make yourself at home. So that experience was life changing for me because I feel the trust and I feel like the family connection towards this corner of the world. So that is why I kept going back again and again, and finally did my PhD there. Although I'm in Shanghai, but I will go back to Oslo for my postdoc actually very soon, because it's a very unique community, I'd say, and I don't see so many politics and like rumors as in the US fandom. So it's more like easy and more like comfortable for me.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what you were doing at the University of Oslo, and what you're going to
Yeah.
do in the future when you go back?
Yeah, definitely. So I did my PhD at the University of Oslo with the Co-Futures group. So you probably know that Co-Futures is a research group that focuses on global science fiction and futurism, especially from the non-Anglophone part of the world. So I did my PhD on female science fiction in China, especially from the environmental and gender perspective. And for my postdoc, it would be related with artificial intelligence. So I will look at, of course, like this hot topic in speculative fiction and look at how East Asian speculative narratives talk about AI and how they are different from the Western narratives about AI.
Is China generally, because in America, I feel like almost everyone is pretty negative on AI, like sees it as kind of a bad thing. But I would assume China is generally more hopeful about AI. Is that the case?
Yeah, exactly. And so it's very interesting. I know that in the US, the writers are all like concerned about the copyright issues about generative AI. And in China, like we're like the authors are also concerned about it, but also they are also welcoming it, embracing it to co-write with AI, to use like tools for like writing. And it's like very interesting. Actually, next week I'm going to attend an award ceremony in China. It's like a mainstream literature award, and as the winners of the award, we will be co-writing with AI during the award ceremony and then discuss about our writing. So you can see like this is a very like open-minded and positive attitude towards AI instead of those we should like not use them and not let them steal our writing. So it's quite different.
Yeah, I've been kind of surprised at just how opposed to AI, like the sci-fi literature community has been in the United States in particular. I actually feel like sci-fi authors are even more opposed to AI than the general population, which is interesting to me in that like sci-fi authors, while they are in some ways threatened by AI, they also sort of feel ideally positioned to take advantage of it, right? Like, I think that if that is the way that you're thinking, you can think of better ways to apply AI creatively to produce like interesting commentaries. You touched on this a little bit in The Way Spring Arrives. Like, there was one author, I think it was like, was it Xia Jia? By writing in English, they were trying to replicate what it might be for an artificial intelligence to like predictively write a story, and that was a pretty interesting essay. But I was wondering, like, do you think that there will be a sort of equilibrium? Like, what do you think like a healthy relationship between sci-fi authors and artificial intelligence might look like?
Mhm. Yeah, I think like of course, the firstly like the author's rights need to be like valued. So instead of, because like the issue is not like the artificial intelligence technology itself, is like the company behind. They are using those writers. Stories to feed their AI models without permission. So that's the real issue. It's not like the technology itself. It's because like this uh, like company behind using those without permission. And I think like the how probably we need to find a way to with the AI as like we can do what we are good at, because like human beings and like the current AI, they are good at different things, and we should try to collaborate instead of like asking AI to imitate what human beings are doing. For example, ask AI to write a story just like human being and submit it to magazines. That's caused a huge issue for magazines, because you can like produce so many just rubbish stories and just spam their submissions. That is a huge issue. So we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't just like ask AI to imitate human writings, but we should find the way to enhance what AI is good at. I remember I read several authors, or writers, talking about how they are writing with AI. For example, Ken Liu talked about he tries to ask AI to be an interviewer or to discuss the stories, or critique or interviewer to discuss the stories that he has written. So you kind of have your own writer's studio at your screen, because usually when you write a story, you need some like comments from others. So he tries to ask the AI to give comments on his stories. That could be something is useful for writers. And also Chen Fan, science fiction writer from China, he wrote the Waste Tide, and he has also like co-written many stories with AI. And I think he uses AI, and he has used many different models, and the recent story he has written is about writing with the AI. I think he's trying to write with AI, fighting against what the AI is producing instead of follow the AI's way of writing. So you should find those creative ways of working with AI, and not just like asking them to imitate what human being is already doing, because that's not fun.
You know, it kind of reminds me of the story that you wrote that we were talking about earlier. Was it the language sheath? Is that what it was called?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think something that story got me thinking about is there's kind of like when you're translating, there's like two parts, right? There's like getting the actual meaning across, which is like the task attempted by translation. But then you also have the fact that the language that you speak in actually changes like the structure of your thoughts. And so I was wondering, like, in the past, it's like really only been possible to get closer to what the meaning of the statement that the author was trying to say is. But I'm wondering if AI could also help bridge the gap between like different ways that like people are cognitively wired by their language, sort of. There's like the Ted Chiang story of your life, where they explore this idea in detail. I was wondering, like, do you think that your brain has started to become rewired as a result of learning different languages? And like, are there certain things that you try to think about in a certain language specifically because that's just like more natural than your mother tongue?
Yeah, definitely. Actually, like I definitely feel that when I use English and the Chinese, and also like I started to learn Norwegian a couple of years ago. I also like feel that. I think like it's very interesting for me. I think I'm more like extrovert when I use English. I'm more introvert when I use Chinese. I think like language has kind of made something to my mind. And also like I write in English and Chinese, I have different voices. So when I write in English, because I don't feel confident to write from the human perspective, so I always choose non-human perspective when I write in English. It's after that I have written several stories that I noticed that, oh, it's always like alien or like non-human beings or like other things. So I feel like I get a different voice, because I feel myself alien when you using English to write, and that's actually like also like kind of translate that voice into Chinese, so I can write something quite different from my original like Chinese voice when I write in Chinese. So that is very fun how language can do in your mind or in your writing, because they definitely add different layers. Maybe it's our like mind structure has been changed. I don't know, but I definitely feel the difference.
I remember I saw a thing, Murakami, the Japanese magical realist author. He writes all his stories first in English, even though he publishes them in Japanese. He'll like write them in English, then translate them into Japanese, and then they'll get published. And then when I read them, it'll be like translated back into English, which is yeah, pretty funny. But like he's like something about like his voice feels like comes out clearer when he writes it first in English and then translates it, which is yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's like you have an extra tool to work with to some extent. Like I can only speak English, so I can only just write something in English right away. But if it's like another language could like give you something else to work with.
Yeah, I feel English as a language it's more direct and exact, while Chinese is more like vague and ambiguous. That can like words can have many different meanings, but in English you have to be very specific and exact on what you mean. So that's quite different.
This whole experience of engaging with Chinese science fiction has actually made me way more interested in learning another language than I ever have been before. Because previously I was just like, oh, well, you know, I'm learning a language, but it's just kind of like replacing something that I already know how to do. But I think it seems to me that Chinese and English are so far apart cognitively that you would actually sort of like be able to have thoughts that you would not be able to have like just having English, especially because through looking at stuff I came to the conclusion that I'm probably like even more cognitively English, so to speak, than like the median English speaker. So I feel like for me personally, like I might have even more to gain by learning Chinese specifically. But this is just not something I was really exposed to because, you know, I think Spanish, French, English are like not too dissimilar in terms of like the sorts of ideas that can be formed. But like I think it's interesting, like if you learn Chinese, like not to communicate with Chinese people, to have like more access to more kinds of I've never really heard of that before. Like, do you think that this is like is this like a thing? Like, do people do this?
I don't think people do
I mean,
this.
like learn Chinese not to communicate with Chinese people, but just to like try to change your
Yeah.
brain.
Try to change your brain, yeah. Like that also feels like something where maybe it's like possible with like artificial intelligence. You could kind of get it to teach you like a very few ideas that you know how to do in Chinese, but it's because it kind of can like expand your thoughts. So I don't know. That was something that I was like maybe interested in doing in the future.
And you can also like communicate with artificial intelligence in Chinese, so you don't need to like find the Chinese people, but you can practice. And
It'd be funny if you like ended up with a totally wrong like Chinese, like they just fed you wrong information about Chinese. You have all these ideas about Chinese that are just not actually true, but you don't know because you've never talked to a Chinese person. You've only talked to AI.
yeah,
You just have like
maybe you can develop a new language.
yeah, it's like a third language. That would be crazy. That could be a story.
Yeah.
That could be a story.
Yes.
Yeah, it could be a story.
All right. Well, on that note, I think this is a pretty good time to wrap things up. As a final note, is there any particular short story that you would like to recommend?
I can recommend my own stories if you like,
You
because
can
it's really
Sure,
hard
yeah,
to
you can recommend your own story.
other stories. Um, yeah, so I have a story that's called The Winter Garden. That's is one of my personal favorite actually. It's also in Clark's World, and it's about like a very old like cliche science fiction setting that is parallel world, but it's about like one woman find herself in the parallel world, and they made interaction that's not so cliche. And another story is a record of lost time that's published in Lightspeed magazine. So that is about the technology of time acceleration. It's also cliche, but what I try to talk about in the story is that the time acceleration technology is actually radioactive, and it's not only influencing yourself, but also influencing the world that is surrounding you. So in the end, what you are doing have an impact on the whole world. So like I think like what I usually tend to write is try to find not so cliche narratives for the cliche science fiction setting or science fiction ideas. So yeah, that's what I think of.
Thanks for listening, and we will see you all next week.
Welcome back. So, any thoughts on the episode, Kevin?
Yeah, I think the episode went pretty well. We've been trying to get on some kind of Chinese speculative fiction related guest for a while. And so it was great that we were actually finally able to make that happen. I will say that going in, I kind of imagined Regina as being more of a translator than she actually is, which I should have done more of my due diligence. But I remember, I thought it would just be, a really interesting question. Why did she get someone else to help translate her stories? I kind of thought there'd be some really interesting story behind, oh yeah, well, I'm pretty good at translating this aspect of Chinese, and this other person is really good at translating this other aspect of Chinese, and so we have really good synergy. But in the actual answer, turned to be yeah, I'm just not really that good at translating. So I think I definitely should have prepared less questions relating to translation specifically, but I feel like all the stuff that we were able to ask about fandom went pretty well. I feel like we were able to get a pretty interesting window into maybe not what the typical Chinese speculative fiction fan is but just, what kind of fan Regina is. And I don't know. She definitely seemed to me like a pretty interesting fan.
Yeah. It was really fun to hear about her adventures in Finnish speculative fiction culture. I will say, it does kind of feel like the kind of university sci-fi club experience in China is just more of a thing than it is here in the US,
it
for
seems to be
sure.
really cool. I would love to be part of a really active speculative fiction club that's actually tied to the mainstream institutions. If the UW speculative fiction club had trips to Worldcon and stuff. I feel like going to Worldcon in 2023 with this UW speculative fiction club would be pretty hype.
Yeah, it would be pretty cool. But there's not really the people for it, I feel like.
I feel like there's just not the institutions for it. I think you could find plenty of people who would tentatively be down. I don't know. I think if you had a really good tabling situation for some kind of speculative fiction club, and the club was hype and had people running it that were hype, then it would work out fine.
I think you could get people to join club for sure. I don't know. I think it would be more difficult to get people to go to Worldcon. I guess mainly because I think you could get people to join a science fiction club that don't really actually read, because I think a lot of people are oh yeah, science fiction, I love science fiction's so cool. And then it's just oh, what are some books you like? And then he's oh well, I remember when I was 12, I read Ender's Game. And it's just oh, okay. But
yeah, that's true. I think probably it would be harder to feel like you were part of some national thing, I guess. In China, right? Science fiction world and also Cixin Liu are kind of these two attractors that don't really exist in American science fiction. And so I think that it wouldn't feel as much that you're part of a thing, and that would be a cool part of it. But I also just feel yeah, if you had the right institutional support, you could definitely get people to go to Worldcon. I just feel like those sorts of things are pretty much just a direct function of institutional investment.
Yeah, I will admit, I think it's quite possible some universities do any universities have science fiction clubs? I wouldn't rule it out.
I'm sure they do. But
I'm sure there are some that exist.
Let me check. I'm actually curious.
Okay, it doesn't seem like UIUC had one.
Okay, I don't think UW had one.
Yeah.
Okay. Gosh.
So some places have got to have, MIT's gotta, right? Let me see.
MIT. If MIT doesn't have one, that would be just wild.
MIT Science Fiction Society. Okay.
Right. Maybe
MIT has one. Oh, this is not just a college club, though.
Oh, interesting.
Or membership's not restricted to MIT students. I think it's mainly run and primarily for students, but I think it could be potentially the thing that's originally what it is, but now it's a bunch of 50-something year olds and the occasional student who shows up. I would not be shocked.
I think the lack of any science fiction club at all in two of the most STEM-focused public universities in the whole country is a pretty big indictment of the health and vitality of
Yeah,
science.
that are both like more than 30,000 students. Like surely there's enough people at these two.
Part of the reason that I want to talk to someone involved in Chinese speculative fiction is because I've been having a lot of ideas, speculations, you could say, about how Western speculative fiction is different from Chinese speculative fiction. And I want to make sure that these were not completely insane. And so before this episode, I had talked to this guy from China named Paul, who one of my friends found from Red Note. And you know, he was a cool guy, just like answers my questions for like 4 hours.
Nice.
And I came to the conclusion that like my ideas about how Chinese science fiction and Western speculative fiction differ are sort of like directionally correct, but they're probably more similar than I was imagining. I think that the biggest piece that I was missing in my analysis, though, was just like how young Chinese speculative fiction is compared to American speculative fiction. And I feel like that might be the biggest difference. Because also, I think that one of the other most substantive differences is that like there's much more romanticism and optimism about science in China and in Chinese science fiction as a result. And I feel like there's definitely less technological optimism in America than in China, just because of what has happened. But I feel like among young people in particular, it's actually even more pronounced. Like, people in America are really just black-pilled about technology in a way that I would not expect in China. I mean, the other thing too is that obviously the US has the latest and greatest at like the tip of technology, but as far as technology that you come into contact with in your everyday life, I feel that China is significantly more advanced. Like, if you go to some kind of train station or you interact with some kind of kiosk at the mall, because China is so centralized with all of its planning, they can just roll out these technological updates immediately. And so I think that also, as an American, you're much more likely to encounter just like technology that's just like an obsolescence, and you're just like, technology. I don't think you'd have that same experience in China. You know, actually, something that was kind of funny about that episode is that I would say that over the past year or so, I've started to hold Chinese government efficiency in like much higher regard, just based on the moves that they've been making technologically, economically, and how they can just like get things built, get things done. I've just been like, wow, China is so like agile and able to do things compared to us, regardless of any ideological disagreements I may have with them. So it was kind of, I don't know if reassuring is the right word, but it was kind of a reality check when she was talking about the Chinese government really trying to get the world into like classical Chinese poetry and just epically failing. Like, it's like kind of went against how I imagine the Chinese government. They're just like, yes, we must export Li Bai to the world. And then the world's just like, cool.
Something I like about Chinese science fiction is I don't even think these stories are like necessarily amazing, but I feel like there's a style of Chinese science fiction story which you just kind of like, man from like humble beginning is really smart and eventually like has some good ideas and is able to like alongside his fellow countrymen contribute to this great scientific achievement. And this great scientific achievement was great. The end. And like this story would like never get like published in English. Like even if the end takeaway is supposed to be that like the characters are heroic and stuff, there's always something that goes wrong. Yeah, you might have something where it's like ambiguous at the end, like okay, it did a lot of good, but it like came at this cost. Like I feel, but there's always at least tension, and a lot of the times it's just like, yeah, this is like a horrific technological development. Here's what happened as a result. But yeah, that's not necessarily the case in Chinese science fiction, which is cool. It's sort of like the opposite, where reading a book or something, if you know the main character is gonna survive because like they're the main character, it takes a bit of the tension away. But like reading an author like George R. R. Martin or something who's like known to kill off characters like adds tensions. In the same way, in the opposite way, kind of, I feel like reading Chinese science fiction is just like, this technology, like, it might actually just work. It might actually just be good, you know? It, like, adds tension. Where, like, reading, like, some Western science fiction is just like, like, you can kind of, like, already see, like, the flaws and, like, what's gonna happen, like, before it does. It can become a bit predictable. All right, so changing tunes a bit here. Kevin and I both read all the short stories that were nominated for the Hugo Awards, and there's also an article out with our reviews. But yeah, what do you think of these stories, Kevin?
Yeah, so I was a little bit apprehensive going in because I am generally not super impressed with modern speculative fiction stories compared to novels. Yeah, I really like a lot of speculative fiction short stories from the past, and I just feel like I have kind of a high bar. And I guess I would say I'm still apprehensive after the fact. I didn't love these stories, but I will say that I thought like at least two of them were like pretty good. Like I would feel pretty good about recommending them. And I was a little bit afraid that after reading the entire slate, I'd just be like, wow, all of these suck. But yeah, I thought that Three Faces of Beheading by Arkady Martin and We Will Teach You How to Read, We'll Teach You How to Read by Carolyn M. Yoachim were both pretty good and like somewhat speculatively ambitious, which is cool too.
Yeah, yeah, I would definitely agree that those were my two favorites of these. I would say, yeah, they're sort of different in that I think We Will Teach You How to Read was like definitely the most kind of structurally unique one. It was like the only one that had kind of like a non-standard reading experience in that the story is basically set up. The context of the story is sort of like this alien race trying to get humanity through you, the reader, to be able to kind of read two things at once, and has this kind of like repetitive mantra portion of text on one side, and then like this other half of the text, which contains the actual story, I guess. But not all that much happens really. So, like, in terms of, I don't know, interesting, like, speculative ideas and stuff, it's mainly set up in the structure. But I find it really enjoyable to just like kind of try to read both these things at once. I was kind of talking to myself, saying the one side of this story while I like read the other side in my head, and I found that pretty fun. Yeah, it was a pretty unique experience. Did you enjoy the process of reading that one?
I think kind of a little bit. Like I was definitely not as creative as you. I was kind of trying to do a thing where I was like looking at both of the texts at the same time and trying to get them to go in my brain. I'm like, this is not really working. It's funny because I remember at the start of the read through, I was just like thinking like, like fuck this. I'm just gonna read the left side. And then like at a certain point on the left side, they're just like, do not like specifically read the left side. I'm like, okay, fine. I won't read the left side.
I think I did that too. I was like, okay, I can see it's repeating on the right. I don't need to bother with this bullshit. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I would say that in my initial read through, I did find it to be like a little bit annoying because I think after maybe like, I don't know, 5 pages or so, the novelty kind of wears off where you're like, okay, I'm picking up what you're putting down. The story doesn't really try to innovate beyond the central idea, but I kind of think that's part of it. You know, like they're really just trying to desperately like
Yeah.
get this idea into your brain. I think what would have really elevated the story for me, and I talk about this in my review, but I think this story would really benefit from being web fiction. Like, I think this story would really benefit if there was some kind of like artsy, atmospheric music playing in the background, and there's sort of maybe like, I don't know, whispers or at least like a little bit of movement. Like, I think that you could really play with that and kind of get closer to capturing this vibe. I mean, it is kind of cool to have the reader try to like create some stuff for themselves, but I think just having a little bit of like motion and texture in addition to the story would have really elevated it. And I also felt that it was a really kind of awkward to read in PDF form. Like there were certain parts that I was like, I don't really think this is typeset in the way that the author intended it to be viewed. So I think that this would have been a really good like single web page parallax scrolling reading experience.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that tracks. And there's like almost a story, but there's like not really a story. Like
Yeah,
nothing
and that's why I
actually
think it'd
really
be so good
happened.
for that. Like,
Yeah, yeah. Like I wish there was a bit more of a story, or if there was no story, I guess like I wish it was a bit shorter.
right,
But
right.
yeah, yeah. I was able to make the length like I kind of agree it like felt like a bit long and tiresome. I was able to make it work for myself because I was kind of just like practicing this experimental reading and I was like not that good at it for a while and it was just like okay I have like more time to try it out and like by the end I was sort of cooking. But yeah, it was kind of a bit strange. But I thought it was really cool that this story existed, I guess. Like, I had not seen a story like trying to teach you a skill like explicitly before. like I want you, the reader, to try and learn this skill.
I was kind of surprised by how postmodern this slate was. There wasn't very much in the way of just like a conventional science fiction narrative.
Mhm.
I kind of thought that there would be at least like one story that was just more straight up. Whereas, this story was very postmodern. I would say that Three Faces of a Beheading was not as postmodern, but it was definitely it definitely felt a bit postmodern. And like,
Yeah, yeah.
most of these, I would honestly say that like, would you say that like none of these stories were like especially plot driven?
I would say Marginalia was pretty plot driven. I just didn't find the plot all that interesting, but I think it was pretty plot driven.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. Okay.
and I guess why don't we just get in the Omelas hole was sort of plot driven.
Oh, that's actually true. That's actually true. Yeah, I guess that one was plot driven. I mean, what do we want to say about this Omelas story? Like,
uh, yeah, so this is kind of interesting reading because if you go back to the Naomi Kanakia episode, Naomi Kanakia kind of like brings up this story to rail on it a bit. And neither Kevin and I had read it. We were like vaguely aware, and we knew we were going to read it, but she was kind of like, the story sucks. I will admit, I think it was like I almost certainly preferred it to Naomi Kanakia. And I think it was like a bit better than what I was expecting based on what she said. But yeah, this was not a very good story. Yeah, in particular, I guess I'm just kind of annoyed at like it's just like Omelas fan fiction. Like it takes place in the world created by this other author, and that is like the setting. And it's kind of like weird to consider it for an award. Like I'm fine with these types of stories existing, but like I think in terms of like giving a Hugo Award to like best short story or something, it's like kind of depressing if it's just like not original content. It just like feels kind of wrong to me. It rubs me the wrong way.
well, taste may vary, but I think that if you are doing fan fiction, there is much more of a burden on you to cook. It's like,
Yeah, yeah.
please prove to me why it was worth it for you to write this fan fiction and that it should be award nominated. I actually think the story like would have been a lot better if it wasn't fan fiction.
Yeah, I mean, I agree.
I don't think it was particularly like unenjoyable to read, but I just feel like it didn't really benefit from.
The thing that bothered me is like I think the Omelas setup in this story is like clearly at least a bit different from the original Omelas and the ones who walk away from Omelas. And but it's not like clear when you start reading because like you're kind of assuming it's gonna be the same thing because like why else would you would you set the story here? But it's like it's a bit different. Like it still uses the fact that there's this tortured child and stuff, but like the society is like less egalitarian and whatnot than the actual Omelas society is. It's just kind of awkward. Like I feel like you could convey the same like philosophical argument and ideas contained in this story by like creating your own world and whatnot and setting it there. And I think it would be more interesting.
Completely missed the point. I mean, maybe they're not missing the point. Like maybe they do understand and they're just opposed to the thought experiment in general. But I feel like the whole point of this story is to force us to grapple with trade-offs in this very absolute way.
We briefly mentioned that we both liked Three Faces of a Beheading, but didn't really talk about it. So in this story, basically, there's this technology sort of, which are these like historiographies, which are basically these video game, like VR type video games where you kind of like load into a historical figure's life, kind of, or at least like some period, like some soldier in a war or something, and kind of just like do actions and try to succeed at some goal. People like stream these, and then a lot of people will watch them, and there's like famous versions of people like achieving great things. And yeah, in particular, this story, okay, it was really hard to tell what's going on, so I might just like be getting things wrong in this synopsis, sort of. Like, I don't even know if that's exactly what the technology was doing. I thought it was hard to tell what was going on in a cool way, though. But in this story, it basically opens with this revolutionary event where this player of one of these historiographies like kills themselves in an act of rebellion against like the actual government in the game. It's sort of hard because like nothing's really spoken on in terms of like what's actually happening in the world in the story, but like you got the sense it's like some sort of like somewhat totalitarian-y government. And yeah, it's kind of about how this like event is just like inspires the main character. But just like this technology in general, or this idea, I thought was like really cool. This story definitely for me had by far the most interesting ideas out of any of the stories. Like there's just like a lot of times it's like, whoa.
Yeah, I mean, this was really my kind of story because it tries to speculate about media. It tries to speculate about a different type of media narrative that might be popular in the future. And it even talks about its popularity. You know, like it talks about people consuming this and talks about how people relate to it. Definitely, I think I was kind of in the target audience for this story. I would say that my prose style tastes are a little more pedestrian. Like, I think I would have preferred a little bit less ambiguity in what was going on, given the story was already kind of complicated. But I don't think that made the story worse, really. I just feel like it kind of like made it less of like a page turner and more of a like, let me like figure out what is going on, which is probably, I guess, more what you want for a short story. I think that this story it was like innovative on a like on an ideas level, but I feel like it was also pretty innovative on a stylistic level. One thing that the author Martine does, who is also a historian, is she got some chunks of like this history paper that she was writing that she just admits will probably never see the light of day, and just like drop fragments of this paper directly into the story to explain some elements of how this technology works and why it's needed. And so you're just like reading the story and they're like, wow, I guess I'm reading like an academic text now. And she has real citations to real books that have been written. And I guess I thought this was just like really confusing because like the blurring between fiction and reality was really strong. But I at least like appreciated the effort, and I also think like history is cool. So by extension, I thought that was pretty cool.
Stylistically, I think the like prose was a bit weird as well, in that it was pretty much all in second person, I believe.
Oh right, I kind of forgot about that.
But like it kind of like swapped. I feel like sometimes it was like very casual, and like sometimes it was like very mythological and epic.
Sometimes it was literally just history text.
yeah. I guess the history text part wasn't in the second person, but yeah, I think I don't know. I think it fit.
With the stories, what was it? 5 Views of Planet Tartarus?
Okay, yeah, 5 Views from Planet Tartarus,
and then also like Marginalia. I guess both of these stories, I just kind of was like didn't really get the point, I guess. Like I didn't really understand like what in particular was being speculated about. I don't necessarily think these were bad stories, but I just was not really sure like what their reason for being was, and I also don't think they were entertaining enough to make up for that.
Yeah, I thought like the first story, 5 Views from Planet Tartarus. So I mean, it was flash fiction, but like despite the fact that it was flash and very short, it still somehow felt like kind of bloated in terms of like what it was actually saying. It's like no events happened. I feel like, I don't know, I would get equal value out of a story that would just be like, wouldn't it be crazy if there was a prison where they just like sent a bunch of people to be permanently alive around a planet?
Yeah, like a Reddit
Like,
2-sentence horror or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like it didn't feel like having like 5 paragraphs worth instead of that really added everything. Like if you actually had a plot or something, that would be one thing. Or you had like some really visceral descriptions of things or something, then that could work. But there just like wasn't really anything there. It was just a premise and then it was done. And then for marginalia, like the kind of like story graph or whatever, where it's like exposition, rising action, and then like climax, and then like falling action. And it's like it's always got like this tilted shape because like you want like after the climax, the falling action and the resolution to be done. This story was like exposition, little bit of rising action, kind of like main climax scene, then like a fuck ton of falling action. Like half the story was like falling action or like falling action and like conclusion stuff for like no reason. Like the climax of the story happened like halfway through and like all the action sequences were just like already done by this point. And then like the second half of the story was just this giant kind of awkward conversation in which like the main character sort of attempts to get like rewarded for her brother as a result of their good deeds, and there's like nothing new and interesting that happens really, and it felt very strange.
I do agree with you that the central monster in the story was kind of interesting. Like you basically have this slow passive snail that nevertheless is highly corrosive and like leaves this very dangerous trail of slime in its wake. And one of the things that needs to be done in the story is they need to turn the snail, because like if they don't do that, then it'll be really inconvenient for people who live in this certain part of the domain. And so you need to like turn the snail so that the slime trail was going in a different direction. And like I thought that was kind of cool, but I also just felt like the plot of the story was just not really conducive to that. I don't think it really highlighted how novel this was. Like I think it would be much more interesting if you just somehow played with like, I don't know, maybe like the geography of some location being defined by these slime trails, or just something that highlighted this unique mechanic. But in the end, I don't really think the story would have been all that different if there was some like generic monster. So I feel like there was kind of a missed opportunity there.
Yeah, and like I feel like the main beats of the story were on just like the main character and her relationship with her mother who was sick and her brother. And it's just like there wasn't all that much there, I feel like. But yeah, I thought the climactic sequence was all right at least. But then yeah, the other one we have is Stitched to Skin Like Family Is. And I guess I feel like about this one somewhat similarly to what you were saying about Three Faces of a Beheading, in that it's like quite hard to tell what's going on. And this is like maybe a good thing for a story, but I think in this case it was honestly just like too hard to tell what was going on. I read this story like 3 times, I guess, and now I think I get what's going on. Also, after talking to you, after having read it 3 times, and it's like, I don't know, at a certain point, it's just like you can't really expect your readers to read a story that in depth. But I thought it was kind of impressive that I think it can be learned. I don't think it was like super ambiguous. I think it was just like confusing and like you had to like dig into what's going on.
This was an interesting one. This story was basically about a woman that is able to control and communicate with pieces of clothing, and like specifically being to like in some ways commune with the owner of the garment or past owner of the garment. And she is like in the course of the story communing with some members of her family that are like no longer with her. I would say this was definitely the most literary of any of the stories. Like this was the only story that wouldn't feel super out of place if it was published in like Granta or N+1 or something. And it definitely had that style. I don't know if this was just because of the setting or if there was any kind of prose connection, but it reminded me a bit of like a Flannery O'Connor story. Like you have these sort of like ambiguous interpersonal interactions with a lot of subtext, and then there's just kind of like this very dramatic violent action that happens, and you're just like, whoa, why did that happen? And then you kind of just like go back and like analyze the conversations, and you're like, okay, I guess I can kind of understand why that happened. But I'm not really sure how to place this one. With We Will Teach You How to Read and Three Faces of Beheading, I think those were pretty clearly the strongest ones. I feel
like this is pretty clearly the third best story.
Yeah,
like, kind of regardless of how you place it. But
yeah, I think the other ones were maybe not quite so good. I think this one is like, yeah, probably the third best story, but like, I don't know if it's like close to the top half or the bottom half, I guess. Like, I think for the right person, this would have been like this could have been a banger. I could imagine
Yeah.
someone like really enjoying the story and defending it pretty well. I think there was a lot of interesting things that can be picked up on a reread, which I know some people are really into. I'm personally not as into that, but I know that's some people's cup of tea. But I can't say that I loved reading the story, although I definitely thought that some parts of it were pretty interesting.
I kind of wish I liked this story more. Like, I think it was really cool. I even like it. I guess I wish I enjoyed like the reading experience more. It was just like it requires like so much focus and just like trying to figure out like what's going on. Specifically, there's like a lot of this italicized text, which is sort of like coming sort of unclear, coming from like the clothes basically to her. Like spoken by the clothes, but it's kind of unclear if it's like originating from the clothes or like from their past owners or their current owners, or if she's like listening to like thoughts of the person like as they're happening, or
Or she's being the show.
or she's just like imagining things. Yeah. And yeah, there's like no dialogue tags or anything. I think this is a fair choice. Like, I think they would be kind of out of place, but it does make it like, yeah, kind of hard to follow. Where it's just like a lot of times you can't even tell like which piece of clothing this is referring to without like kind of looking back. Sometimes it's like like a piece of clothing speaks to her, and then it's like kind of like later, like, oh, this was like her brother's, but like you don't know that at the time, and it's just like tough to follow. Very tough to follow the story. All right. Well, I think that's a good time to wrap things up. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you all next week.